Hi, thanks for tuning in. This is the ASX and Sectors weekly chart analysis for the week ending 12th of December 2025. First chart is the S&P ASX 200 index. It closed higher this week. You can see price pushed just above the 3-week high there after testing for supply last week and testing for supply for at least the early part of this week below the previous bar's close. Price did push higher in the end and closed pretty much at the breakdown line above. Volume wasn't particularly high, but that probably reflects the fact that the market was testing for supply for most of the week. It was trading sideways in consolidation mode, absorbing any supply that was drawn out, and it really only ticked up and moved higher on Friday. I expect it will take an extra effort to push above this level, the 18,750 level here. This is a breakdown line here, and they're always difficult to overcome. Completely possible to overcome. There's just some increased resistance at these levels. You've got this congestion here in the background, which will include trapped holders who will sell for break even if price pushes up above that level. And that supply that's drawn out will need to be absorbed or bought by the market for price to push up and recover back into this level above the breakdown line. So it will take some increased effort to make its way above that breakdown line in the past. Next chart is the mid-cap sector. The mid-caps are comprised of the bottom 50 stocks in the ASX 100 index. Here's the lows of the range through here. This is the breakdown line that the parent index, the XJO, has to recover above. This market never pushed below that level. You've got the highs of the range up here, and there is an intermediate level in between that goes through there. That's a minor breakdown line within the range. It won't be as difficult to recover back above that level. There'll be some resistance drawn out when that line is challenged, no doubt, but it won't be as serious as the resistance that we just talked about on the ASX 200 index. This is a more minor level within the range. Price spent this week testing for supply pretty much for the whole week, below the previous bar's close. In there, dipping down earlier, testing the strength of the market below the previous bar's low, before just popping up and closing adjacent to its close on low volume. You've had low volume the last 2 weeks, below average volume, and prices trading within the range of this previous up bar. It seems to be quite comfortable within that range there. It doesn't appear to be a great deal of selling pressure being drawn out. That will allow this market to push higher when trading conditions become more favourable. The small ordinaries are comprised of the bottom 200 stocks in the ASX 300 index. You've got the highs of the range up here. There's a breakdown line through here. Price continued lower here after it broke down. There was a minor level through there. Price pushed lower, and then there was a strong recovery. In one single week, it recovered 3 weeks of weakness. That was a good, strong recovery there. Price tested for supply last week, and it spent most of this week testing for supply or in consolidation mode within the range of the previous bar. Price remains below this breakdown line, and it will likely take some sort of increased effort to push above that level. Similar to the other two charts though, there's a breakdown line above. It'll have some degree of resistance surrounding it, and it will need to be overcome for price to push higher. This is the financial sector, easily the largest ASX sector by some way. Probably the best way to draw this is to put an oblique line in like that. I don't normally use oblique lines a great deal, but That one is well founded there. You can see price broke down below that level. There was some buying support on this bar. If you notice, spread on this bar is about half of the previous bar, yet volume was about the same. That suggests that some buying support came in. It wasn't an attempt to recover, it was absorption. It was quietly buying, allowing the market to come to the buyers. They were just sitting there waiting and the market was selling to them. And in response, you had a minor up bar that closed poorly. That's pretty much confirming that there was buying in the market on this previous bar here, because if that was all supply there on this bar, there's no way the market was going up the next week. There's just no way. And closing above the previous bar's close. It's just not going to happen. If that was all supply, the next bar would have been down for sure. So there was buying support come in there. Then you had a test for supply come minor mini shakeout. And this week a response to that, pushing higher. This is some form of accumulation through here by the looks. That's yet to be confirmed, but that's what it appears to be at the moment. Prices floated higher on relatively low volume this week. So selling pressure was light. There was a short period of consolidation below the previous bar's close, testing for supply and consolidating before the market just pushed higher to close still within this bar's range. The real resistance is going to be at this level here. They may find some through there, also through there. And I expect this level is where the price closed this week, just above it. So that's all looking a little messy right now, but the market is attempting to consolidate and is possibly accumulating at this level. And there's going to be some resistance above, but it hasn't been encountered as yet. This is the metals and mining subsector. And we've got the old highs of the range coming through here. You can see price pushed above that level last week, tested for supply below the previous bar's close before pushing higher this week. This little period of consolidation here is going to provide some strength for a push higher in response, and that appears to be what's happening right now, because volumes are reduced and below average at the moment, yet price has effectively broken out. There was a test for supply last week and then a push higher in response. That suggests there's very low selling pressure in this market, and it's allowing price to just float higher on relatively low selling pressure. That often is not a good thing if supply continues to be drawn out, because there's not much holding the market up. But at this point, price has broken out above what is a fairly important level here, and it's moved higher with reasonably good spreads considering. So it's not looking in danger, but just be aware that so far the breakout has been on low volume. You'd like to see a little more volume come in and provide some strength and stability to a breakout. This is the ASX gold sector. Price closed higher this week. Highs of the range pretty much come through there. Lows of the range through here. Price did test for supply below the previous bar's close. Markets are generally moving up or down, or testing for supply, or consolidating. Same thing. Price did test for supply below the previous bar's close before pushing higher this week and closing pretty much at or just slightly above the highs of this bar. So price hasn't really broken out at this point, but there's some pressure on to do so. And you can see the market has got a pressing nature towards the upside here that's been developing for some time. There's no real weakness in this market. And whenever there is a down bar, especially a threatening one like this perhaps, the next bar is up in response in the fashion of bullish absorption. where you've got a pressing nature towards the upside, threatening down bars that show no downside follow through, and clustering of closes, sort of like this in here. There's 3 closes all together. Generally is a way of identifying bullish absorption. And when price pushes higher, it can either do so in one great fell swoop, or it can grind its way higher. And that's what this market is doing at the moment. It's grinding its way higher. Whenever any weakness comes in, there's sufficient buyers in the market to absorb that supply, and the next bar is up in response. So this market's looking pretty good, really. It's certainly not looking weak. The ASX energy sector spent this week trading inside the range of the previous bar. Here's the lows of the current range through here. There's a minor up bar in response last week, and this week price has traded below the previous bar's close within the range of that previous bar as an inside bar all week on reduced volume, which is what you would expect to see. This market is well placed to push higher in response. It doesn't appear there's any great amount of selling pressure in this market, and that would allow price to push up to this breakdown line above about 9,000 and perhaps even challenge it if trading conditions become more favourable. But I would expect the market to at least attempt to push higher in response next week. This is the ASX healthcare sector. It has a failed accumulation in the background, but you've got a secondary attempt, which is happening at the moment. Price pushed higher 3 weeks ago, and the last 2 weeks have traded back through the range of that bar on very low volume. There's very little supply in this market that's probably been absorbed over this months of trading back here. That allowed price to push higher in response. It's faded lower over the last 2 weeks. You'll probably find at some point there'll be a buy the offer type bar where the market has pulled back and then just buys up all the offer that's sitting there for sale as a way of accumulating without pushing price against itself too seriously. There's the line above. It's the breakdown line. That's going to be a little difficult to overcome. There is going to be some resistance there, and that resistance will last some time, possibly through here like this. You'll have some resistance at this level and some further resistance as price pushes up adjacent to this level. I expect some of that supply that may have been sitting there stale has probably sold down here, which is reflected by these increased volumes down here, which will weaken that resistance to some degree, but there'll be some there for sure. So while price is trading below this level, below this bar's low, is probably in relative safety. There's not going to be much supply drawn out down there. But once it attempts to push higher, it will start to encounter some supply. And that'll be a little bit more difficult for the market to overcome, at least in the near term. The ASX industrial sector, it looks like the big push high that we followed for so long is over. It really culminated with this bar here on the increased volume. It doesn't look like much, but the market sold off there. It's really never properly recovered since then. There was an attempt to push higher after a period of consolidation through here, but that appears to have drawn out supply almost immediately. Price attempted to absorb that supply and push higher again, but it encountered further supply through here. Price pulled back during this period here, and it's come down to what are the lows of the range through there. It's attempted to find support 3 weeks ago, and price has traded within the range of that bar since then. And really, you would expect to see a push higher in response. The last 2 weeks of consolidation within that up bar's range were on low volume as price pulled back. So it does appear that selling pressure has eased, but this has been a long time coming since this weakness emerged here. Whenever prices pushed up towards these highs, supply has been encountered each time through here. So I'm not holding as much positive thoughts for this market as I was earlier. I thought it was going to just recover through here and push higher from there, but it never happened, and further supply continues to be drawn out each time price attempts to push higher and up to challenge the highs of the range through there. So we'll see what comes. I expect there will be an attempt to push higher in response. You've had a pretty good up bar here, and then 2 weeks of consolidation within that up bar's range on low volume. So that should open the door for an attempt to push higher. We'll just see what we get when it does so. This is the ASX consumer staples sector, and this market's been trading sideways for a period of time now. You've got resistance above through there, and the market has been supporting through here for some time now. The strength started to emerge on these two bars here, and price has really traded in consolidation mode ever since. Once again, you've had a stronger up bar here, although the volume wasn't particularly high, and then you've had 2 weeks of consolidation within that bar's range. So this market should also attempt to push higher in response. There was some supply drawn out on this bar here, but this week's trading does suggest that supply has eased and has perhaps been absorbed, and that should allow this market to push higher and probably up to this breakdown line. Whether it will be strong enough to push through that level, I'm not sure, but it should be strong enough to at least push up to that level, and then we'll just see how strong the market really is. The next chart is the consumer discretionaries, and they've been looking a little weaker than expected for a while now. Price pushed up to this level, the highs of the range, and you can see that when the market wasn't able to keep tapping up here the old highs and it was just fading lower, there was weakness being encountered through here, and that's pretty much what's happened. Price broke down on this bar, it's traded lower, it's shown a reluctance to move lower through here, a little up bar, and then this market is attempting to consolidate in a similar fashion to those other markets we've just been looking at. You can see that this market's struggling to hold on to the lows of the range here and has traded below that up bar's lows, which is suggesting there is a little weakness in this market. It's attempting to hold on and it's doing a pretty good job, but it's finding the going a little more difficult than some of those other markets. You can see the last 2 weeks trading of consolidation, really it's drawn out average volume. It's not below average volume like some of those other markets. Spread did narrow last week on the average volume, so that is some minor sign of strength coming in. I think there may be an attempt to push higher in response here. You're going to have the highs of that bar as minor resistance above, so that's possibly where the market could go in the near term. The narrowed spread here on average or slightly above average volume last week does suggest there was a little buying support emerge in the market, and if that's correct, you'll likely see the market attempt to push higher in response. I'm not sure it's going to be a successful push higher. That's yet to be seen, but there may be a push higher in response, just in response to that buying support which did emerge this week. This is the ASX property sector. It's been trading along the lows of this bar for some time now. You've got a breakdown line through here. This market's not looking particularly strong either. If you look at, here's the breakdown on these two bars here. This was an attempt to absorb supply. Price did push higher in response, showing you there was that attempt to absorb supply, but it's closed mid-bar on fairly good volume here. So supply was being drawn out. Price pushed lower in response, but supply continued to be relatively high. It did hold on at the lows of the range, so there's a balance between the buyers and the sellers here. There are sellers in the market, but there's been sufficient buyers to at least attempt to absorb that supply and hold on to the lows. This week, price has responded positively and pushed higher. A little test below the previous bar's close there, and a push higher on pretty good volume, but the spread was very narrow. And that's suggesting that the sellers are selling into the push higher and keeping that spread narrow. Volume was way too high for a narrow spread like that. That's telling you that there was supply being drawn out. And you'll probably find a down bar in response or a sideways bar at best. We'll have to wait for the response. There's some chance the market has absorbed that supply and will attempt to push higher. But at this point in time, the odds would be with the sellers in the market and not with the buyers. And we'll just wait and see. If price did attempt to push higher, there is going to be reasonable resistance found at this breakdown line above. I'm not expecting it to push up there. I'm expecting it to test the strength of the lows. Just back to the parent index before we wrap up. Price closed higher this week. We've had 2 weeks effectively of consolidation through here. Breakdown line just above, which is expected to have some resistance surrounding it at 87.50. I do think the market may attempt to challenge that level. I'm not sure it'll be successful. Okay, thanks for your time. I may not be doing a weekly charts next weekend. I've got a very busy weekend. I will try to put something together if possible, but I'm unsure at the moment. I certainly won't be available on Friday and Saturday, so it'll probably be Sunday if I did something. If not, I'll make sure there's something done over that Christmas, New Year's break. Okay, thanks for your time. See ya.